I'm delighted to be joined by the Work and Pension Secretary, Therese Coffey. Therese, so much to discuss. Why hasn't the Prime Minister condemned Trump personally?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has been clear tonight that we need a peace and orderly transition. Clearly, Joe Biden will be formally adopted as president in his inauguration in a fortnight's time, and we're already working with the administration. And it's very clear these distressing, despicable scenes are no endorsement of democracy. And I am conscious that the National Guard is now in there trying to take back control of this disruptive situation. But as Joe Biden himself said earlier today, this is a small group of people who are acting like a mob, and that needs to be what is being condemned. And the sooner that we can get that orderly and peaceful transition, the better.
I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we had people working for the government who were, frankly, setting out to undermine confidence in the judges, in Parliament. I mean, that, frankly, now that we've seen what's going on in America, was wrong, wasn't it?
Well, I think that we've seen some strength of people like the Supreme Court in the US rejecting the accusations about the different elements of what's been happening in the electoral system there. I mean, clearly that's a matter for the USA.
But I'm talking about what's happened in Britain. I mean, you know, during the whole Brexit process, you know, frankly, people working for the Prime Minister went out of their way to undermine confidence in the way that Parliament works, in the way that the Supreme Court works, in the way the judicial system works. And we can now see, looking at America, what the price of that could be.
Well, we haven't seen any scenes like that. I mean, I've been elected 4 times now, and there were some very difficult scenes after the 2015 election, but nothing on this scale. And I think it's important that politicians on all sides of the political debate do respect the institutions in which we serve, do respect each other, and do respect democratic outcomes. So I think it's an ongoing reminder that actually democracy is something precious and will continue to thrive as long as we protect the institutions that make this country important and not demean each other, when actually the majority of what we want to achieve together is very much similar outcomes, although sometimes in political frames a different way of trying to make that happen.
Therese, I'm going to come back to you in a minute and we're going to talk a little bit about lockdown and COVID. But first, Anushka's got some information for us. Yeah, thanks. I do want to talk about COVID because we've all seen these terrible figures, and many people are now thinking of this as a race between the damage COVID is wreaking on the NHS and the potential safety net of that vaccination rollout. But how quick will it be, and will it actually reduce these pressures on hospitals? Firstly, on speed, let me just show you some international comparisons. This looks at the number of people vaccinated per million in various countries. That's us there. You can see not terrible, ahead of Germany, Italy and France, but behind the US, behind Spain and way behind Israel, where they've actually vaccinated more than half of over 60s. As for how quickly vaccines will help the NHS, I've got this interesting analysis from Professor Tim Cook of the University of Bristol, who has looked at what might happen to ICU admissions in orange, and then to hospital admissions more generally in blue, and to deaths in red, as we vaccinate more and more of the population. We know that it is happening in age order, starting with the groups here. And Boris Johnson is hopeful, although not guaranteeing, that we will get to group 4. That is here by mid-February. And that is all over 70s. Now, unquestionably, if you look at these lines, that does reduce pressure, particularly on deaths and somewhat on the NHS. But actually, you have to go significantly further to really drive down these ICU admissions. And they only get to half the level here when we reach Group 7. That is all over 60s. And that assumes that everyone has the vaccine and it is 100% effective. So when will we get there or beyond? Well, the suggestion of the spring might explain why MPs have voted for lockdown legislation to last all the way through to the 31st of March. Robert. Thanks, Anushka. Lots of important stuff to chew over. I'm going to go back to Therese Coffey, though, for a second. I don't know if you heard Jeremy Hunt just now saying that, as far as he was concerned, the Prime Minister had all the data needed to lock down a week earlier. We've heard tonight, seen tonight from the HSJ, this NHS England forecast that London hospitals will, on all scenarios, be overwhelmed within a couple of weeks. Why didn't the Prime Minister lock down a week earlier?
Well, it was only on Monday, I understand, that the Prime Minister was shared with the data and the view from the chief medical officers across the UK that we should move to level 5, which is that clear signal that the NHS could be overwhelmed within 3 weeks. And it's later that afternoon that it was very clear that, and he announced to the nation that same day, that we would move to this national lockdown, which is now in effect. So I think we have moved quickly. At the same time, the vaccination plan is clearly ramping up, particularly with the very recent authorisation of the Oxford AstraZeneca, which is much easier to deploy. That I'm confident that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, everybody over the age of 80 will have had at least the offer of the vaccine that people should be able to take up, and that we will be escalating and the number of vaccinations happening for the other top 4 cohorts as well.
But I'm sort of struck that you're saying a former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, is wrong on that. But others of your colleagues are fearful that you're going to be in lockdown, because that's what legislation says, or we're going to be in lockdown, let's be clear, all the way to the end of March. They want to know, what is it that you're looking for that would allow you to ease up before then? What are the targets? None of us really know what you are looking to achieve in this lockdown. Can you set those out for us?
Well, I believe Matt Hancock will be setting out in a couple of days' time the detailed vaccination plan, but we have always been clear that we will look closely at the data and the evidence and act upon that. And I think this is clear by moving into level 5 and moving into this lockdown, that we want to make sure that everybody in those first 4 cohorts, which represents more than half of the people at risk of death if they contract this virus, to have at least been offered the first dose of the vaccine by mid-February. I think from there we'll be opening up the more phases to come through. And it's likely, I think, we need to reach a critical mass, probably of about 20 to 25 million people, to try and get that mass vaccination target well and truly underway. But at the same time, the Prime Minister will do what he committed to do, to look again in a fortnight's time at the data, to act on that, and to keep that standard measured approach, but reacting more quickly than a fortnight's time if that's what's needed for measures in either direction.
No, I get all that. I mean, there's one thing which is absolutely slap bang in the middle of your area. The legislation certainly makes it look as though it's very likely there are going to be very significant restrictions on all of us running to at least the end of March and maybe longer. On the current plan, the £20 top-up, which is so valuable to people, the top-up to universal credit, expires in March. It can't be removed in March, can it? That would be appalling.
Well, as I set out to Parliament at the end of November, that this would be considered in the new year, so it is still under review. And I know that the Chancellor has already acted strongly by announcing yesterday nearly another over £4.5 billion of extra support to go towards businesses across the country.
But we're talking about poor people who are struggling. It sounds to me as though you're having an argument with the Chancellor, aren't you, about this? You don't want the £20 taken away, do you?
Well, as I say, this is under review. I'm conscious of how important the £20 uplift has been, and it was a responsible reaction by the Chancellor to move quickly when the pandemic first broke out. And that's why we're continuing to work together on the different impacts of the, frankly, well over £200 billion of support that we're giving in a variety of ways to the country, whether that's through welfare benefits, whether it's support for organisations. And that's important to make sure that we keep focusing on what is the most effective impact in order to help people right across the country.
Therese, great as always to see you. Thank you so much for joining us on it feels like a fairly historic night, and hope to see you again soon.